I've always been a Spider-Man fan. I grew up watching the Spider-Man animated series in the 2000s, and I knew Tobey Maguire as the first big screen Spider-Man. Before I was a MCU fan, I was a comic book fan. And before I was a comic book fan, I was a Spider-Man fan. So whenever there's something Spidey related, you can call me in to make a video or an article. Now, I actually watched this movie a little later than I will catch MCU films. I waited a full 3 weeks since it was released, partly because I had plenty going on and just couldn't find the time. But if I were to be honest, it's mostly because I wasn't all that excited about this movie. And coming from me, that's saying a lot. You see, the thing is, I kind of grew old of young Peter Parker. Like high school romance Peter Parker. I'm a college student in my 20s now. And whenever the media serves me a teenage Peter Parker, I can't help but kind of feel old and detached. Now, I understand there are various adaptations and versions of Peter Parker out there in various medias. There is literally a Spider-Verse full of them. But my favorite Peter Parker from the comics will always be the millionaire Peter Parker. Now, you see, the idea was interesting and fresh, and we get to see a Peter with too much money, which is a very fresh take on the once broke and penniless Peter Parker. Now he faces other money and responsibility problems like answering to his board of directors and investors and his shareholders. Instead of worrying on how and when to pay the bills, Peter now has different and more interesting problems. And while they may not be very relevant to the average John Doe, I feel that it was a fresh take on the character. He also made Spider-Man publicly his bodyguard and now has cheekier and more cunning ways to dodge the public and don on his suit. Now, even though that character arc was written pretty poorly in the comics and it caused Peter to feel out of character, and most fans may not have liked that arc of his, I felt that the concept was a fresh and interesting one, and it was just one that was poorly executed. Well, if we are talking about a more commonly known example, I would say Spider-Man PS4 was probably my favorite Spider-Man, and a more experienced and matured Peter Parker is exactly what I would love to see come to life on screen. My favorite Peter Parker and Spider-Man out of all three actors would actually be Andrew Garfield, because I feel that at the very least he encompasses parts of Spider-Man which I really enjoy, such as his jokes and his quips, and even though the script was really poorly written for the Amazing Spider-Man series, I would have really hoped for an Amazing Spider-Man 3. Now, back to Far From Home, I went into the movie hoping to see what MCU has in store for my favorite hero in Underoos. And maybe it will be something different, and maybe it will be something new. Well, it turned out to be something terrible. Now, even though I waited for quite a while till I watched it in the cinemas, I was actually able to avoid the spoilers, surprisingly. Now, it was pretty obvious that Mysterio was going to pull a fast one and become the villain of the story. So the only question was how. But my first few impressions of the movie wasn't a very pleasant one, because of a few reasons. Now, the first one, the whole saga with Mysterio makes Nick Fury look very incompetent. Well, partnering up with Mysterio and believing his story without much validation. And it kind of doesn't seem like the Nick Fury that I know from the comics and the Nick Fury that was established up till before Captain Marvel was released. My second issue with the movie was actually with regards to Peter and Mysterio. Seeing as how the previous film didn't really have Peter totally win the Vulture, it was more of Vulture self-destructing and losing the battle, so it didn't feel like a total superhero victory or a win for Peter. Well, in this movie, I felt that since Peter is about to get conned right from the start, and the career Spider-Man is not my favorite type of Spider-Man, so I didn't feel that Peter would really get a superhero victory at the end of the movie, which of course I was quick to be proven wrong. But all in all, I kind of went in with quite little hope and lowered expectations for the movie. And at this point of time, I should mention that I kind of had to watch the movie with 3 annoying Holland fangirls right behind me, sitting behind me and screaming at every scene, so that part wasn't very pleasant either. But anyway, let's get to the movie. Now, in my opinion, Homecoming did a better job at balancing the school and the superhero lifestyle of Peter. And it's nice that we get to see a 100% swap of Peter Parker's responsibilities and priorities. From a kid that wanted to play with the big boys Avengers in Homecoming, we kind of now have a teen that only wants to be Peter Parker instead of being superhero Spider-Man. But sadly to me, most of the schoolboy scenes actually bored the hell out of me. It's not to say that the idea of Peter as a teenage kid should be ignored completely, but I feel that there are better ways to do it. The film just outright does Peter a huge disservice, and that is probably one of my biggest issues with it. The thing is, this movie had a lot going on in the first act. You kind of have to add the PTSD and the anxiety subplot that Peter is going through, and you also have to stuff the school trip and the romance part onto the scenes. And with that, you kind of get a little of everything, but not too much of something. We didn't really have enough time to understand or find out why Peter is in love with MJ, except for a conversation which narrates everything about Peter's feelings for MJ and its grand plan to get her to the Eiffel Tower. Now, the school trip was supposed to have high personal stakes for our hero, but I never once felt that in the first half of the movie. At least not until the bar scene where Peter said he wanted to kiss MJ and Mysterio had that little laugh and everything. And that was when I really started to feel that, wow, this school trip is supposed to mean something big for our hero. But, the entire scene and the feelings Peter has for MJ, the suspense, slowly loses its effect because you realize that it isn't going to be an unrequited crush. They are going to end up together. I don't think MCU has it in them to break the MJ Peter up, or the willpower to kill Ned off in the storyline. Now, one of the biggest quarrel or problems I have with the Amazing Spider-Man series was that I felt they weren't harsh enough on Peter in the first movie, in Amazing Spider-Man. Gwen and Peter should have broken up, which would leave audiences heartbroken, but it would have a very strong impact on the story. It would build our character, it will give him the idea of responsibility, and that was pretty much how the first Raimi film ended, with Spider-Man rejecting Mary Jane. But it's kind of obvious right off the bat from the trailers and everything that this isn't going to happen in Far From Home. They wanted Spider-Man to have a little victory. And the addition of a love rival into the story wouldn't really change anything because we kind of know that Peter is going to win. So in the romance department, there really wasn't much suspense in terms of storytelling. The love rival is kind of meant to lose right from the start in this love rival triangle, and his role doesn't really add to the stakes. It doesn't add to Peter's challenge of getting the girl, it doesn't add to the depth of the story or any other characters. It kind of would have made more sense for that guy to be a Harry Osborn, because at least we'll get a few name drops and we start to build this character of Harry Osborn. But now that the movie is over, I kind of even forgotten what his name was. And together with the rest of the school cast, they belong to a section and a group I would like to call I kind of wish Hawk snapped them away, or I kind of wish Hawk didn't snap them back. Now, this may be a controversial opinion, but I felt that for majority of the film, Far From Home still doesn't have consequences, which is slightly ironic if not pathetic if you think about it. Carrying on from Endgame, the disappearance of half the universe population is reminded and unpacked at the start of the movie, which is a plus. But carrying on from Homecoming, we kind of have Aunt May being 1000% supportive of Peter, even telling Peter to pack his suit constantly for the trip. I think the only concern from her was an off-screen moment during Peter's trip, and the audience didn't really get to see how much of Aunt May has changed or adapted since she went from Peter Parker's Aunt May to Spider-Man's legal guardian. The first act of the movie, you get to see Aunt May being the cool aunt and all, but we don't really see how she came to terms with Peter Parker doing superhero stuff. I mean, she kind of experienced the whole Spider-Man going to space after she found out the secret, and we never really get any reference to it, any worry, or the fact that Peter might be in danger from all these superhero things. The transition kind of happens, and it's over and not revisited. We didn't even get to peek at how it would have affected her and her relationship with Peter. In the comics, the moment Aunt May learns of Peter's secret is kind of a big moment, a moment of growth for her character and for Spider-Man. And she even visited Uncle Ben's grave afterwards. And she talked to Peter about it, and it was revealed that she was also partially responsible for Ben's death in her own way as well. Now granted, the comics had enough and plenty of Spider-Man history and material to play with, to experiment with, and to use as source material or ideas to build a character. The MCU at this point, however, does not. So to let Aunt May find out the secret, yet do nothing significant to the plot or character development, I feel it's a very lazy decision that I do not support and can't see the reason for. Now the problem with Aunt May is also related to Uncle Ben, who doesn't seem to exist in the MCU at this point in time. Ben FP appears as what we guess to be Ben's initials for the film on the suitcase, and that's just it. We kind of never got an actual confirmation of whether that's Uncle Ben's name or it's just a brand of a suitcase. After the third reboot of Spider-Man, or rather the second reboot and the third film, we don't really need to know or see another Uncle Ben die. But assuming that Uncle Ben's role is similar to the movie's source material, Peter still has an uncle. One that helped him grow and brought him up. A guardian, a father figure in the absence of his parents. And Iron Man entering the picture as a father figure shouldn't really change the fact that Peter had Uncle Ben. The problem isn't with Iron Man being Uncle Ben's replacement in the MCU. The problem is that even if Uncle Ben wasn't the guy who told Peter about responsibility, the MCU completely glosses over the idea of Uncle Ben not being in the picture anymore. Uncle Ben could have died from a heart attack for all I care. It doesn't have to be the same way as how Batman's parents died, but it should still mean something to Peter and May. But for May to be just so okay with Peter's hero life after losing her partner, and considering Peter's young age, it's really kind of scary if you think about it. After 2 Spidey movies without any mention of Uncle Ben, I think at this point of time it's kind of just better and more consistent for the MCU to let the story rest and not have Uncle Ben be part of it. Now I really have a lot to say about the characters, but I also don't want to rant too much and make this an hour-long thing. And also I kind of think it's beyond my ability as a writer to summarize what I really feel towards these characters. They kind of went a horizontal way to develop the side characters where they kind of give everyone a little bit of character and lines. And that's just it. There is no growth, no depth, nothing. I feel that the name drops are fine. Flash so far in 2 movies is pretty modernized while retaining the bully side of him and his idolization of Spider-Man. And with his social media live stream thing, I thought it would kind of be a good way to bring in the topic of cyberbullying to this version of the Flash instead of a physical bullying that we have been seeing from the previous film series, and also the verbal bullying that we saw from Homecoming. Except that they didn't, and it became another missed opportunity which could have been explored. And now that Peter's identity is all exposed, I don't see a room for them to explore this aspect of the character of Flash, without it being a one-liner or an off-screen flashback approach. Remember when I said the film doesn't balance the school life and the superhero aspect of Spider-Man well? I think majority of this complaint comes from the romance subplot, which really felt forced. One in particular I really disliked was the part where MJ had to run off to the bridge and carry that heavy weapon in her hands, just so they could shove the MJ-Peter romance down my throat. And the writers even have Peter purposely remove his mask so that they could have a romantic scene together, which didn't just feel out of place and forced, it felt completely unnecessary. I don't think the impact could have been any different or significantly changed if we had the celebration scene between MJ and Peter right after the battle, after Peter became Peter Parker instead of while he was still in a costume of Spider-Man. And honestly, with all the casual unmasking Peter did in the movie, I'm more impressed that the general public and satellites or any Big Brother cameras didn't really catch on to his identity before the post-credit scenes. I mean, let's consider the bus scene for a moment. Now, even if he were to pull the "oh, look there, there's a bird" trick with his schoolmates and teachers, are you telling me that no one from any other vehicles or anywhere else saw him do this stunt? I mean, come on, Peter, are you even trying? Are the writers even trying? I don't mind the romance subplot. The issue I have with it, as with the other things, is how it was executed. From the start when they dumped the expository to the end when they kissed, everything felt forced. I remember watching the kissing scene where MJ ran up to Peter and all I could think about was, alright, let's get it over with, so we can move on to the next part of the movie. And even if you were to appeal to the teenage child in me to enjoy the cute moments between MJ and Peter, it will still be a tough film for me to swallow. They barely have any on-screen development, they barely have on-screen scenes before we get the "I have a crush" on MJ. It was barely hinted in Infinity War before Peter zips off and flies to outer space, so we really don't have much to work with or connect with. And in this movie there wasn't any build-up, just more scenes playing on the already established crush that Peter has for her. I don't know, maybe I'm just too old for all of this. Now, I won't say too much on this because I feel it's a shared sentiment, but the humor in this film is just way off. Which makes me sadder because none of the humor were used or played to develop the story or the characters. They were just very cheap shots to be funny, for the sake of being funny. Worse still, we have Spider-Man not delivering any of those humor jokes or one-liner quips. In fact, the only one time he made a very Spidey joke I remembered was when he talks about his little web shooter being a little tight in the new suit, and that's about it. An iconic characteristics of Spider-Man that I really adored was his quips and one-liners, which were either very serious and had top-notch moments like this, or were just him trying very hard to be funny at the wrong times. And sometimes it's the fact that when he tries hard and acknowledges that it's a bad joke that makes the whole scene funnier. The MCU seems to want an awkward but funny Spider, which I feel could work with Peter but not with Spider-Man. And on top of that, I feel that not tackling this issue of Spider-Man making jokes was another missed opportunity for the creative team. It could have been an angle to tackle in the movie, exploring Peter's lack of confidence and his insecurities, not just as a human, but also as a superhero, where he's swinging with the big boys like Thor and Iron Man and Captain America, a living legend, a millionaire, and a demigod, while he's just a kid from Queens. And this could all serve as a very big reason to drive him towards a direction where he doesn't want to join Nick Fury's team, but eventually he's forced to. And when Mysterio gives him a "I believe in you" moment, it will be sufficient for Spider-Man to lower his guard and make the handling of the EDF glasses much more meaningful and convincing. Now, I'm not saying that the irresponsible decision of Spider-Man was bad for this movie. I just felt that there were more ways to tackle it, but could also build Spider-Man as a character, and would have been more useful to the story throughout. I was also really looking forward to Spider-Man calling Mysterio Fishbowl Head. As for the villains, I kind of don't have much to say or complain, because I feel that the movie has more problems than just its villains. The complaint of Tony Stark inspired villains doesn't really hold much weight, because if you think back on it, we kind of have plenty of Tony Stark inspired villains since the start of the MCU. And the MCU kind of always had a villain issue. So this film is no exception, and this problem is nothing new. But at least we kind of have a villain that, although twisted, really wanted to kill Spider-Man due to his own reasons. And that's very Spider-Man villain of Mysterio as far as comic book goes. Now, another moment I felt was very impactful to Spider-Man as a character wasn't just the plain scene where he was building his new suit, but rather the scene before that, when Happy was picking him up and Peter, which was still slightly affected by Mysterio's illusion, asked for Happy to confirm his identity, which Happy does by calling back to the first few instances they met and injecting a bit of humor into the scene. It was a great scene for me because I felt how lost Spidey was and how afraid he was when he had to confirm the identity of Happy. And for the first time in the film, you feel how Spider-Man was just genuinely defeated. Homecoming had the Spider-Man trapped under the rumble scene, and I felt that this was the equivalent for Far From Home. But this is what I would have suggested. Let Happy call back to a different moment. Make the scene with less humor, but with more weight towards the characters and the story. Now granted, there aren't many scenes to choose from, scenes which Happy and Peter share together, but I will go with the toilet scene that Peter and Happy were talking about at the end of Homecoming. Now this is how I would have preferred the scene to go. We have Peter telling Happy to confirm his identity, and Happy says something like, well, Tony Stark gave you the suit. And Peter would counteract with saying, no, that's something that Mysterio could also know. Try again. And Happy tries something else. I'm in love with your aunt. Peter is kind of shocked, but he also says that that is something that anyone else could know or sense. Now Happy thinks a little longer and he finally says this.
Now remember, kid, remember when I caught you and said that I was wrong? Remember that you kept calling me and I kept ignoring your phone calls? And that you were right about the villain, I was wrong. Wrong for ignoring you, wrong for not believing in you, and wrong for thinking that all you ever were just a kid.
Now imagine if Happy said that. It would have made the scene afterwards a little more powerful because Peter screws up this time. The reason behind the call wasn't I kind of knew something, Happy, you gotta believe me, I'm onto something. It was I'm in trouble and I need help kind of moment. A reminder of his previous triumph moments would have made Peter feel much worse in the moment where he has to get help from Happy. Then enter the plane, Happy tells him about Tony, and Happy ends it by saying that, I thought you were just a kid. I was wrong. You aren't a kid, you are someone special, and that's what Tony saw in you. That's why Tony chose you. Then Spidey gets back on his feet, starts building his suit, and everything comes to one full circle. As Happy starts to see what he saw in Tony, I would have liked that, and I would say I'm kind of disappointed that the movie didn't steer scenes like this into a powerful and heavy direction, but instead chose to go with humor instead. Ultimately, I feel that the movie fails in its delivery, not just in the first act, but the entirety of the movie. Which is kind of sad because the movie really had some good fight scenes, such as Mysterio and Spider-Man's battle, and I really enjoyed both battles, both at the start, in the middle of the film, and the second climactic battle which Mysterio and Spidey has. The setup of the movie itself leaves very little room for the film to explore other aspects apart from a post-Endgame MCU and the romance subplot of MJ and Peter. Now once again, opinions like this are very subjective, and what seems like a good film to someone may not be one for me. And for this movie, I didn't really enjoy it because it wasn't what I was looking for in Spider-Man. The movie caters more to a teenage fangirl type of film, and it's not one that I particularly enjoy. Another issue I have with the movie was that it also didn't feel like the end of Phase 3. It felt more like the end of Phase 4 for the MCU as a whole. And to market it as the final film of Phase 3 for the MCU felt like a cheap marketing technique that didn't really convince me. Now the post-credit scenes does give more room for possibilities, but that's another topic for another day. Anyway, that's the end of the video. This video isn't sponsored, but it is inspired by the various video essays I see online on YouTube. A huge shout out to the Spidey fans around the world. Feel free to leave a comment down below to tell us where you are all from. And to Brown Table, High Top Films, and the various video essay channels online, thank you for the amazing content that you bring to the community. I'm also interested to make a One Marvelous Scene video soon, just to talk about my favorite MCU moment. But I don't want to make it seem as though I'm storming into a parade uninvited and inserting myself into the community forcefully. So if any of the channels out there do take notice of this video, it would mean a lot to me if you could leave a comment down below. And to the others watching this video, thank you for watching, and if you really enjoyed the video, all I ask for is just one like from you. Otherwise, I hope you'll stay around and I'll see you again next time.